Welcome to the Grant Training Series. My name is Elizabeth Franco, and I am the Manager of Grants and Partnerships at the Santa Clara County Office of Education. Thank you for joining us for the Grant Training Series with the topic of, is the grant a fit? The purpose of this training is to review how to determine if a grant opportunity is a good fit for your organization. Here's our agenda for this time. We will be reviewing the following factors: eligibility, competitiveness, mission alignment, internal capacity, cost-benefit analysis, risks, and sustainability. Before we begin, I want to review this quote: "Just because you can doesn't mean you should," by Sherilyn Kenyon. Preparing a grant takes time, effort, and resources. Implementing an awarded grant takes an even greater amount of time, effort, and resources. Before committing, it is essential to ensure that the grant is a good fit for your organization's needs and capabilities. But just because you can apply doesn't mean you should. We will be using this funding opportunity as an example as we go through this training. This is from Applied Materials, the funding guidelines. Applied Materials and its foundation are committed to making a positive social contribution in communities where our employees work and to the world around us. We prioritize the needs of neighborhoods near our facilities, where our investments can enhance educational outcomes for underserved students, contribute to a vibrant, innovative arts sector, provide basic services to those less fortunate, and promote environmental stewardship. So let's start by looking at eligibility. First thing you want to ask when you look at any funding opportunity is, are you eligible? There are two main things to look at. First is the type of organization, and the second is geographic location. For the type of organization, state and federal government RFAs or RFPs will have a clear eligibility section where they will state who is eligible. Oftentimes, for corporate or foundation funders, it is not as clearly stated, so you need to look carefully at the funding announcement. Geographic location can often be based on where you live or where you're located. Some corporate foundations only provide grants for certain regional areas or areas where their company has facilities. State and federal may also have eligibility around geography because they're trying to serve a very specific area or type of environment. So read this carefully in your RFA or RFP. So let's look at our example funder. In this case, they have clearly stated who is eligible. First, your organization must be a public educational institution or a tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofit. So if you're not either one of these, you are not eligible. Second, they've also discussed the geographic location. This program is for funds serving the following communities. Looking at these list of communities, if you live or if your organization works in one of these communities, then you are eligible. So what can you do if you're not eligible, but you do think that it's a really great grant opportunity that could help promote what you want and need in your school or education system? One thing to do is to collaborate with outside partners. For example, if you have a school and you are already working with, for example, a nonprofit that's providing after-school care and STEM education, you can work together to collaborate on this funding opportunity where the nonprofit would be the main person, would be the organization that is applying, and you would be part of that partnership or collaboration. Please be aware that reaching out and partnering with other organizations can take time to build strong collaboration, and that this collaboration must continue not just to prepare the grant proposal, but also to implement beyond receiving the grant funding and it takes time and effort and commitment from all parties involved. Now let's move to competitiveness. How competitive is the funding opportunity? So this can be a little tricky because sometimes you have to do some digging to really find out the answer to this question. So I'm going to start off with looking at federal grants. Now, government grants, both federal and state, will clearly tell you the amount of funds that are available, the amount of grants they are planning to give, or estimated amount of grants they're planning to give, and the estimated amount they're going to give per grant. For federal grants, please remember federal grants are usually open to 50 states and all the territories. So a grant that's only giving less than 15 awards is going to be highly selective. Only people that write the most thorough grants are going to probably get funded. Grants that are between 15 and 30 awards are still going to be highly competitive. Grants that are giving more than 50 awards are a little bit more likely to be able to be achieved. Keep in mind with government grants that geography is also important because many government grants are looking at geographic parity. So for example, if they're giving 50 grants and the top 40 were all from places in California, they're not going to give all 40 places in California the grant. They need to show that they're spreading their funds around the states and territories. Also, within our own state, if it's a state grant, oftentimes they want to make sure that Central Valley, Northern California, Southern California all have equal parity, geographic parity around receiving funds. Sometimes this geographic parity is just as important as the quality of the proposal you have written, so please be aware. Foundations will often tell the percentage of grants that get funded. And looking at how many awards have been given previously is really important to help you understand how competitive this is. If it's a national funder and they give 8 to 10 awards a year, you know that's going to be highly competitive. You're going to really want to look at those national funders and make sure you're really aligned with them if you decide to apply for a national fund. Whereas regional or local funders, you're going to have a higher level of competitiveness. So let's look at our specific example again. So for this particular example, they don't publish their statistics of the number of grants they get and how many they fund. We do know it's a regional opportunity that's only open to those 7 regions. And within those regions, it's going to be decided by that individual regional board. So you're only competing against people within your own region. Highly recommend that you reach out to the program manager for this grant opportunity and discuss your application to find out if you're going to be competitive. They might have very specific internal ideas about what they want to apply for, and it can save a lot of time to have that conversation with them. When we reviewed this particular funder, it showed in the last funding cycle that of all the grants given in Silicon Valley, only 1 went directly to an education entity, and the rest of the funds all went to 501c3 nonprofit organizations that were partnering with education. So those are things you would want to keep in mind, and that might be a question you would even ask them when you are having your meeting with the program manager. Next, let's move on to mission alignment. You don't want to create a project or a program solely based on the grant opportunity. You want to find grant opportunities that strongly match your mission and align with your organization's goals and funding priorities. Is the purpose of this funding opportunity compatible with your mission, vision, and values? Is it aligned with your department's priorities? We want to make sure we're not applying for funds that are going to lead to mission drift. We want to make sure we're aligned. And then lastly, just as important is, does it align with the funder's goals? It's really important to know what the funder's goals are, to clearly understand that before completing an application. A survey of major foundations reported that over 75% of grant applications received did not match the funder goals. So that means 3 out of 4 applications don't match their goals and are not completely read. The first thing they do is find out if you are aligned. If you are unclear about the focus of the funder, do your research, go to their website, learn more about them, find out who they have funded previously, and reach out to the program manager and ask questions. Let's look at our example. In this case, they have very clearly listed their focus areas of education, arts and culture, civic engagement, environment, and girls' empowerment. And specifically looking at education, they have listed exactly what they're looking to fund. You can see these bullets below the education. Again, it is a local regional opportunity. Reaching out to the program manager for the grants would be somewhat help you to create the strongest application you can. Let's look at now at internal capacity. Understanding if you have the capacity, first of all, to complete the grant. Whether a deadline is realistic depends on many factors, including how much advanced work is already in place to support the proposal development. If you turn in a proposal that is not well thought out, you might find yourself unable to meet your deliverables if you do get funded, or you might not get funded and reduce your reputation with the funder. There's nothing like finding out a grant is available just a few days before it is due and trying to rush and put together something. Oftentimes this would be less beneficial than making sure that you just note it and think about applying for it the next time it's available. So think through what is required for the grant. Do you have the capacity and time to plan and write the grant, including all the attachments, letters, MOUs, etc.? The average amount of time to prepare a grant for a federal grant can be over 100 hours. For state grants can be over 50 hours, and for foundation grants can be up to 20 hours. Second thing to think about is with your internal capacity is, do you need to meet with internal or external partners? Is there time to do this? We mentioned earlier, if it's already a project that's established and you already have partnerships established, their turnaround time is going to be much less. If you have to establish those partnerships, that might take a lot of time. So you want to make sure you have that time. And then the other thing to consider with internal or external partners is what is required by the funder around that partnership, such as an MOU, which can take up to 8 weeks to get, letters of commitment, which can take 2 to 3 weeks. These are usually part of state and federal RFAs. Most foundation grants do not require partnerships, but sometimes letters of support can be beneficial to you when applying for foundation grants. And I'll touch again on that in a moment. And then the last thing to consider about capacity is, does the project expand on existing work, or is it a new idea? If it's a new idea, do you have the capacity to implement it, or will you need to hire someone? You need to understand what your capacity is or can be and what the hidden costs are. If you have to bring someone on board, what is it going to take to onboard them? What kind of time commitment? What kind of administrative assistant time is needed? What kind of accounting support is needed? What other internal departments will be impacted if you get this grant? Again, asking these questions and being aware so that you're prepared and making the right decision. Let's look at our example. In this RFA, there is nothing that requires partners. However, because they have this dedication to working with education, oftentimes the nonprofits are going to be working at a school site. And it's highly recommended that you have some kind of letter of support from that school site to show that there is an existing partnership and that your program is welcome there. And let's move on to the cost benefit analysis. Doing a cost benefit analysis is an important step to determine if you should apply for a grant. Ask yourself these questions. First, is the award amount enough to cover all costs of the project? If it doesn't, where is the other money coming from that's going to help cover the costs? Second, don't forget to include your hidden costs, such as internal cost. Do you need evaluation? Do you need to get meeting and communication help? Will there be technology costs? What other program needs are needed? Will the grant cover all of these? Make sure you write them into the budget. Because if you don't write them in the budget and you need them, how are they going to get paid for? Third, is there a match? And can you meet the match requirements? You want to discuss that with your accounting team. Fourth, are indirect costs allowable and at your established rate? If they're not allowable, how are those administrative costs going to be covered? Again, accounting, just having a discussion with your accounting team would be important. Finally, is supplemental funding available for areas not covered by the grant amount? So this goes back to the first question. If this is only going to cover 90% of what needs to be done or 80%, where are you going to get that supplemental funding from? Often people receive a grant and then they ask themselves these questions. You need to do this prior to even applying. In our example, the funder is providing $30,000 to $50,000. So you would want to think about what is the scope of your project. Is this an existing program and this amount will allow you to expand that program? Or is this a new project and will this cover your startup costs? You might be using this just to cover just part of the costs and you have other funds to support the rest. Again, encouraging you to ask these questions early. Let's move on now to risks. Have you read all of the grant terms and conditions and can you meet them? A lot of times we gloss over those small legal portions of the grant RFA or RFP. You need to read those. You don't want to commit to something when you complete your grant application that you can't do. And one example of this is a federal grant that required nonprofits that were applying to be completely in ADA compliant. And one agency got this grant, realized they weren't completely ADA compliant and had to come up with either all the money to make themselves ADA compliant or give all the money back to the federal government. So again, read the terms and conditions, make sure you can meet them. Can all risks associated with the grant be mitigated? Financial risks. Again, if you're not going to be able to cover the full budget, where are those money coming from? Reputation. Can this impact your reputation based upon who you're partnering with or who the grantor is? Looking at your track record or the track record of the funder. Communication of sensitive information, proprietary information, conflict of interest. Sometimes federal grants have very clear guidelines about what your proprietary information is. Want to think through, is there a conflict of interest? Who funds your funder? So think through all of these before applying. Let's look at our example. Our example requires a proof of non-discrimination policy. You want to make sure this exists. Names of board members. They're going to be looking at your board members and determining if there's any conflict of interest or reputation issues. They also want to look at names of any employees that are affiliated with the funder for conflict of interest. Okay, moving on from risks, our last area is sustainability. Do you have a concrete plan to sustain the program after the grant term is over? Is it a one-time project? Are you hiring staff just for this project? What are your agency's policies around this? What are you going to do when the 2-year project is over? Is this an ongoing project? How will you sustain it? Some foundation funders will support a project or program for 3 to 5 years and then ask you not to apply again for 2 to 3 years. How are you going to sustain after that? In our example, they will award funding again if deliverables are met and the program officer finds a significant impact by the program. Please note, the program officer is going to have a big determination on this. So those positions often change every couple of years. Also, for this particular organization, the people that are within the foundation get to help choose who they are supporting, and they may change as well. So you need to think through, if this is one-time funding, how you will sustain beyond. Here's a tool we created to help you in your decision-making. Please take a screenshot, or this is available on the SCCOE Grants, Partnerships, and Operations page of the Santa Clara County Office of Education website. This decision tree looks through the areas we just discussed and asks some of the questions and helps you think through your next steps when you need to discuss with the supervisor and when you should proceed. You will always want to discuss with your supervisor before proceeding. Here is the link to where you can access this on the website. So I'll pause for a moment so you can take a screenshot and then you can type that in later. I want to thank you for joining us today. Additional resources can be found on the Santa Clara County Office of Education's YouTube channel under the Grants, Partnerships, and Operations playlist. If you have any questions, please email us at grants_office@sccoe.org. And we'd really appreciate if you would fill out our Google survey to provide feedback on this workshop. This link should be in the comment section of the video. If not, you can also take a screenshot and type in that URL later. And thank you for joining us, and we hope you found this useful.